The following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
I am back, and you are comfortably zoned with me, the Zigzag Man, in Alameda, California, right across the bay from San Francisco, in the northern part of the greatest state in the country. That's pretty subjective, I must say, but I have somebody who, another Easterner like myself, who could probably back me up. We'll have an episode of Canna Chat with Rich Moskowitz. How you doing, my friend?
I'm doing great, thanks, Ralph. How are you today?
Oh, good, good. When last we saw you, you were working on a project that you recently completed, and I'm so happy that you did, proud of you for your effort. And if you would fill us in on how this got started and what the process was, kvel a little bit, my friend. You've done good.
Okay, well, just to bring people up to speed, last we chatted, our group, Alameda Cannabis Times, was working on collecting signatures to qualify our ballot measure to put recreational sales onto the ballot here in Alameda. And as a means of background, the city the year before, again, with our help in a different group, ASCA, the original group, we had worked with the community in the city, and they had crafted medical marijuana sales laws and business opportunities, but chose to exclude adult use. So this year we wrote a petition, and as I said, we were in the process of collecting signatures. But I think what you're referring to is what we all started to get wind of in July before the city took a break, and then the city council meeting the other night. So on Tuesday, once again, a very long night at city council, but I'm very glad to report that the city, on their own, decided to add recreational sales to the current laws, increase the dispensary count from 2 to 4, was extremely concerned about delivery options for Alamedans. So while all 4 dispensary permits have the right to have on-site consumption and do delivery, if the operators, the first 2 operators, choose not to do delivery, then the second 2 retail permits, it will be mandated that they offer local delivery. So that was really nice. And wow. Perhaps most sensical, the city decided to remove the 1-mile barrier between dispensaries and instead chose to use Grand Avenue as a dividing line and said that there should be 2 dispensaries on one side of Grand, 2 dispensaries on the other. And that was in direct reaction to the RFP process earlier in the year, where we found that with the restrictions they initially set up, it was almost impossible to find property. So the regulations have finally come around to some degree to where they should have been. Recreational sales, 4 dispensaries, 1 for every 20,000 residents, even though the city's own consultant said there should be 1 for every 15,000. On-site consumption, we're one of 5 cities in California that will allow that, and a host of other things. So the last part of all this, Ralph, is our ballot measure now seems to not be necessary. And even the city staff asked me Tuesday night if I will be officially revoking my ballot measure. And you and I are both East Coasters, and even though everything looks rosy at the moment, and the second
right, we'll see when we believe it. We'll revoke it.
So the process from here is that this was all the first reading on Tuesday. So at the next city council meeting, there's what's known as the second reading, which is the final reading. And it's basically a rubber stamp, but it's the process. And then there's a 30-day period before the law actually goes into effect. So what we're looking at is, because Election Day is Tuesday the 6th, the City Council meeting will actually move to November 7th. And then we are looking at basically the law going into effect December 7th. And then the last part of all this is, when does the city reopen the RFP process, not only for dispensaries, but for all of our cannabis licenses. So that's kind of what's happening. And, it's been a long road.
Okay, how about the law that says in Alameda that one can't consume it in an apartment they rent or a house they rent? What's that about, and has that changed at all?
Okay, so this is a big issue. So the state law terrible phrasing, the state law says that a landlord of a property can choose to not allow medical consumption or consumption of cannabis, not so much about cannabis, but smoking and vaporizing. So that is the state right of a landlord. Alameda did something a little different. We already had a very strict non-smoking law that said if you lived in a shared wall place, then you cannot smoke in your apartment. What they did at the end of last year is they added cannabis and vaporizing to that rule. And what that did is, if you're an Alamedan, medical, recreational, whatever, if you live in a shared wall apartment, it's not up to the landlord. It is against the law for you to consume in your apartment. So that's, of course, really rough in Alameda, but at the same time, the city recognized that's a big problem. They don't want people smoking on the street. That's illegal, but it happens. You can't smoke in your apartment, and you're not going to risk getting thrown out of your apartment. And that was one of the major impetuses for, believe it or not, last year, all 5 council members, 5-0, voting for on-site consumption being allowed at dispensaries. So just to take this one step further, there is an option, however. That means that you can only do that when a dispensary is open, and it doesn't address the fact that many medical patients or older patients have mobility issues. But most importantly, dispensaries are only open normal business hours. So there is still a hole in this for people who don't own their own dwelling. And, perhaps that's the next challenge that we take up. But I need to honor what, I almost do it begrudgingly, but I need to honor what all 5 council members did last year. And they said, this is a distinct problem. This is a legal activity. However, you can't do it in your home. You can't do it in your car. You can't do it in the street. So where can you do it? And they recognize that problem, and that is why today Alameda is one of 5 cities in the entire state of California that allows on-site consumption at dispensaries. So it's a beginning.
Beautiful, beautiful. There was a slogan in New York when it was their own version of PG&E back then. It was called Con Ed. I wonder if they're still doing it. But their slogan was, progress is our most important product. I think it was them. It might have been another commercial. And I equate it to this. We're making progress. Can you go back to 5 years ago when people in California were getting arrested and taken away for smoking a joint? And it's an incredible thing. And if you look back 20 years ago, you could be sent to state prison for smoking a joint. So little by little, it wasn't as fast as I thought it would be. Let's take a second to give credit to the mayor of Alameda, who is really the spark plug behind it all. Trish Herrera Spencer. What would you say to that? Am I accurate?
Well, I guess I should get a spoiler alert here that I'm a big fan of Trish's, and we'll talk about her cannabis, advocacy for sure. But I will have to say, first off, just as a spoiler alert, the reason I'm a big fan of Trish is it's not that I agree with her 100%. I don't agree with anybody other than myself 100%. But she is the first time I've ever met a politician who actually has the people's interest at heart, in my belief, and most importantly, she does not make a predetermined decision on any issue, and at the same time, she's not indebted to money interests as so many politicians are. So that being said, let's talk about this history here real quick. A couple of years ago, Jim Odie put in what's known as a low priority referral. All council members can put in a referral and say, we should discuss this topic. And when they put in that referral, they rank it, let's say 1 to 5, and from low to high. And so Jim put in, say, hey, cannabis is coming. You know, he saw the writing on the wall for recreation, you know, and such. And, of course, in 1996 it came for medical.
Right.
But so he put in a low priority thing. And it just sat there because we have higher priority issues in the city. A year and a half ago or so, roughly, the mayor said, we're not going anywhere with this. This is crazy. Recreational is here. So she put in a high priority referral, which is interesting when one politician does what another politician's doing. So that was the first thing she did. She kind of bucked the traditional system in that way. And that high priority referral is what kick-started all this. So she was there at the beginning. And then she kept pushing. She wanted recreational when we started this. She wanted everything when we started this because she understood what cannabis does for the Alamedan citizens who both use it recreationally and, more importantly, medically. And she also understood what it could do for our city and our economy and perhaps some of our economic woes. So she was always on board. As with anything in politics, it's a long fight. And so I have to agree with you 100%. Trish is the spark of why this really came to blossom and with the citizens. And the funniest thing I just have to say here is I have to say that this is not Trish on cannabis. This is Trish on every issue that she deems important for herself and for the people of the city of Alameda. So, yeah, and we're talking it's late October. We're in 2.5 weeks or so. We have a mayor's race. So let's do a little compare and contrast here for a second.
Oh, I would love to. I thought you'd never ask, Rich.
Okay, so Marilyn has the ass grab.
I'm so against collectively, the candidates that have come up against her are very, very unpalatable for me, and it's just a matter of who you like, who you don't like. So,
well,
please.
I would say something a little different and a compare and contrast because sticking with the same litmus test, so to speak, that Marilyn, from the very beginning, was 100% against all cannabis. Marilyn begrudgingly came to the Citizens Education event that we put on at the Mastic Senior Center, and the entire time was heads down into her laptop or iPad or whatever she had. She didn't
never once looked up. Never once looked up, Rich.
Consistently voted against medical here and consistently voted against everything cannabis with one exception, which I've already credited her for. She was one of the 5-0 votes to on-site consumption, but for every other aspect of anything having to do with cannabis, 100% opposed. So I would say to anybody listening to this podcast, if you believe in personal freedom, if you believe in individual choice, if you believe in current medical research, or if you just happen to like to smoke a joint with or without a beer at the end of a long day of work, keep in mind that Marilyn will not want you to be able to make a decision for yourself on this issue. She feels, much like anybody else in her 1950s view of Alameda, that an individual does not have the right to choose for themselves what legal product to imbibe. And to be honest with you, not only is her position against cannabis, for me, untenable, but that is the tip of the iceberg when it comes to why Marilyn Ezzy Ashcraft is wrong for Alameda.
Okay, now I've heard that said a lot. Reach below the tip of the iceberg a little bit, and I think that kind of attitude reflects a basic mindset. How does it carry over into other parts of her life, her political life, and how would it affect Alamedans if, God forbid, she were elected?
Well, I'll say it first that I personally do not feel that any candidate's personal life is fair game for any conversation about elections and issues. I just don't think that is part of the game. When we talk about
her personal life, her business, her political life.
Right. When we talk about politicians, we have to keep it strictly to their political life. So let's talk about some of these things. Let's look at who's funding Marilyn. And I'm not going to give anybody the answers. I'm just going to say that's information available on the Alameda City website under her political filings that are mandatory, of course. So I like to look at, same as an issue. You know, we're in California, we're facing all these issues, and some of them are pretty darn complicated for a guy like me. So the first thing on the issue is see who's the major
a
funder.
guy like you, you're an old country bumpkin, and you just at the mercy of what the people in town tell you. That's all.
No, but you know what I'm saying. I look at who has the biggest financial interest. Who are the people giving over $50,000? Who are the people who have to be named legally, or the groups? And I start to align their goals with mine. The other thing, quite honestly, I find extraordinarily interesting is that I find that the most effective leaders are the leaders, and my exposure, of course, always been in business, not politics, but I find the most effective leaders are the leaders who assemble a team, and even though they understand their team is not 100% with them on every idea, all humans are different, the sign of an effective leader is that the team respects them. And as somebody who's watched city council meetings for a year and a half, a lot, I can simply say the most fascinating thing, some of the reasons I watch these things and it's not about cannabis, is because I love to see the interaction. One could really assume from watching how people react on the dais that Marilyn does not have the respect of several of those team members, our council members, our elected officials. She seems to always want to talk about herself and what she's done and what she is. And quite honestly, I don't know if it's proper to make this correlation, but there's another political official who always seems to rotate the story to be about him. And, you know, we look forward to getting rid of that political official in 2 years. So I personally feel that Marilyn represents what I like to refer to as 1950s Alameda, back in the good old days, back when the base was here, back when people knew their place, so to speak. Now, the Alameda that I've been here 14 years and the Alameda that I came to was this wonderful little town, and over the last decade, it's become so much better. Now, I'm not talking about development of traffic or any of the issues we face every day. I'm talking about the inclusive spirit. The Alameda represents the Bay Area in so many ways. It's open, it's inclusive, it's diverse, it's growing, it's vibrant. And quite honestly, you know, when you talk about policies, what I see when I watch these city council meetings is Maryland seems to vote with what I'll just call old moneyed interests. And for me, not being, well, I am old, but not being an old money interest, I believe in inclusion. I believe in progressive values, and I don't mean like Alameda progressives or any left-wing thing. I believe in Bay Area values that simply come down to sensible growth, caring for those who we know are at risk, going above and beyond. And because Alameda is such a special place and we're a small place, we have the ability to do things that set us apart from everywhere else and lead the way on many of these issues. And yet, I don't see that under an Ezzy Ashcraft mayoral 4-year term.
Right. There's a law in California that one can harbor refugees or illegal aliens, don't have to turn them in to ICE, or how does that work? And is it, or is Alameda, I can't think of the word, is Alameda one of those cities? And if so, who's for that and who's against it politically?
So I think what you're referring to is sanctuary city status?
Sanctuary, that's the word I was referring to. There are 3 words that I couldn't come up with this morning. Thank God I came up with the other 2. That's just a personal thing between me and me. But sanctuary, we lost on that. So are we a sanctuary city? I jest, but in kidding on the square. And like I say, if so, who approved that or disapproved it?
I have to say, Ralph, I am unsure. I want to say I believe that we passed several ordinances along these lines after the Trump election, but I cannot say whatsoever factually one way or the other. But it's a really simple thing to either call the city or drop them an email. The clerk's office is incredibly responsive. The clerk's office is perhaps my favorite office in the city of Alameda because whenever I have a question, they're there, they're helpful, and they remind me that, oh, my God, government can work. I wish some of the other departments in city government was as effective and as reactive and helpful as the clerk's office. But as I say, I don't know. I know we passed some ordinances. I'm pretty sure we were the first city in the state who voiced their position against the Trump election initially. I know we did a few things initially right back then in November, December timeframe, January, right after the election. I just don't know. I believe we are, but I don't know for a fact.
Okay. Some people take that into account when judging a politician's character. That's all. One way or the other. It's not a right or wrong for some folks, but it is for me, and I will take the opportunity to call the clerk's office and find out. We're off the topic a little bit. Do you consider Maryland to be Mayor Trish's number 1 opponent, most formidable opponent?
Well, she only has 2, and one is Councilman Frank Matarisi. And I actually received in my mailbox a piece from Councilman Matarisi the other day with his ideals and his desires for the city and his little 5x8 postcard. And, yeah, so I considered that mailer a joke. So I do not consider Frank a factor in this election, per se. But clearly the election is between Trish and Maryland. Was
Odeby not a candidate? Or
not for mayor. He's running for his second term in his seat as city council member. So would you
evaluate him as a candidate for anything?
Jim's an interesting guy, you know. To be honest with you, let's put the cannabis lens on Jim first. So, whereas I would have
I could do that.
Well, actually, no, because I have to say about Jim on the cannabis lens, where I would have hoped where he started would have been a much different place than he started. He, in some council meeting, used the phrase, you know, low-hanging fruit, let's go slow. But, you have to give credit where credit's due in this respect. And over the last 2 years, a year and a half of this process, he's really come to the right side. He was a yes on every vote the other night. He's really come a long way. And partially, I think, like so many, like Malia even, it's because of a personal connection. So in Jim's case, I'm not sharing anything out of turn. He did this publicly in July. But he had mentioned he'd been diagnosed with some skin cancer and had looked into some topicals and things like that. And of course, you can't get high on topicals, so it's perfectly fine to drive and that kind of thing. And Malia, of course, had to go to certain dispensaries while her mother was battling cancer. So in the point of Jim, under the cannabis lens, whereas I wish he would have started at a different place to begin with, I really have to give him credit for, where he wound up at the end of this long process. Now, on other issues, because Alameda's full of issues, not just cannabis, on other issues, of course, we know the Jill story, our previous city manager. Everyone's pretty familiar with that story. And the third thing I'd like to say about Jim that makes him such an interesting guy for me is I agree with a lot of his positions. Jim is basically in my age bracket. We've had different lives. I grew up out east and everything else, but we've shared American life experience, and Jim's a Bay Area guy, which means with what we call Bay Area sensibilities, openness, inclusion, blah, all these things that we value and we take to heart, those of us who live here. So it's an interesting election. And, of course, a lot of people have strong opinions about Jim on both sides. So it's one of those things where people have to weigh for themselves what somebody voted on.
I wasn't going to stray this far, but who is he running against for city council?
Well, that race is a crowded race. So we basically have 2 seats open on the council. We have Jim Odie's seat and the former Matarisi seat because he's chosen to run for mayor. So we have 2 open seats in this election, and I believe we have 5 candidates, so 4 actual, strong candidates. So, there's a lot of people vying for 2 seats. So there's John Knox White is out there, Stuart Chan is out there, there's a few other people out there, I believe Rob Matt's out there. And, in our books and with the Google, as they say, people need to look up because not only do I consider mayor the most important race, but, city council is extraordinarily important as well. So
you mentioned Mr. Chen. Mr. Chen had some really incredibly bad publicity early on this week. Do you remember that article that came out? What was that about?
Actually, I was going to say I've had an incredibly busy week myself with a few different projects. Can you reference that article?
There was some case that came to light where, and I'm not even going to say anything about it. I just Google it, folks. Get your own impression. The article was about something that happened quite a long time ago, but it showed some things about him that was disturbing, and before voting for him, one might Google that, and let's see if it turns up in the local paper Thursday. One other thing I want to address with you, and we chatted a little bit the other day about it, and that is the separation of Proposition K, which is the landlord-tenant thing that's going on in Alameda, from the candidates that are running. Can you elaborate on that, maybe by starting to give us a background on how Proposition K came to be? And it isn't cannabis, so if you're not anxious to get into it, I'll fully understand. But if you'd like to keep it simple on this, it would educate me a little bit.
Yeah, then simple is good because this is a really big, complicated issue that everybody's talking about, and I myself feel I have a grasp of it, but I also firmly see both sides of it. So, again, I am certainly not the best person to talk about it, but at what I like to refer to as the 50,000-foot level, we all remember L&M. We all know that Alameda has rent issues. We all know that we have development issues. We all know kind of the background. So, as I understand it, we passed on the last election, L, or L1 as the case may be, and after the people spoke, and we're not even going to talk about how money influences politics and voting and blah, 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 but after the vote was counted, that becomes law. So as I understand it, a few months after it became law, the city council wanted to change it. And so they basically started to pass a motion to change it. And I don't want to say this is the only issue, but it seems at a very high, not really following it like I do cannabis, level, it was about the just cause issue. So there was going to be some ballot measures put on, taken off. All of a sudden we find ourselves now with Measure K. So as I understand it, Measure K enshrines into the city charter the law as it is now. Okay, and that was basically the L1 kind of law that developed. Now, what that means is that city council members can no longer vote to change it. It is part of the city charter. This is kind of the reason why the mayor gets paid 1912 salary, because the compensation is enshrined in the city charter. So let's just talk for 1 second about good and bad using that example. Enshrining something in the city charter means that council members, for better or worse, cannot change it. And the only way you can change it is if there is a ballot measure. Ballot measures can be put on the ballot by the city.
So you know it can be done.
Right. Now, ballot measures could also be put on the ballot by the city. For instance, when they eventually get around to thinking about taxing cannabis, the citizens have to approve it, but that ballot measure will be put on by the city. So ballot measures can come from either side. So let's go back to the mayor's compensation real quick. So 1912 or 20 or whatever ridiculous, time that was enshrined, the people, if they felt the mayor should be compensated at some pseudo-realistic level, would have to put, or the city would have to put a ballot measure on, and then the people would have to agree or disagree. So when we come back to enshrining this into the city charter, one of the issues I look at here, and there's really basic 2 to 3 issues I look at here, but the first issue is, okay, do I trust 5 city council people, a mayor and 4 city council people? And I'm not talking about today. I'm talking about into the future. Do I trust that they will always operate with the small people's best interest at heart? Well, that's a clear no for me on 99% of politicians. So do I also, issue number 2, trust that people properly motivated will act? Well, of course I do, because we just saw that happen with the adult use cannabis issue. So on one hand, looking at that, I'm like, I don't know if I have a problem enshrining it in the charter. On the other hand, and here's what I understand, I did a little research since we talked the other day, here's what I understand of some of the issues being put out there. On the other hand, the rental people feel, not the owners, but the people who represent renters, feel that we have such a liberal / progressive / whatever you want to call it, valued council at the moment, that they might be able to get more protections for renters and such in the coming year or 2. So they are actively fighting not to enshrine it in because they just have to convince 3 council members, right? It becomes a very interesting dynamic when you look at that. The third thing is, quite honestly, and I touched on this earlier, the first when I'm unclear, the first thing I do is look at where the big money's coming from, for this. And on Measure K, people can look where the big money's coming from. It's from the big landlords. So that doesn't instill confidence in me. Now, let's bring this back home. One of the things I love about Mayor Spencer is when you ask Mayor Spencer a question, she will tell you her thinking. She will not ask you to think like she will do. She will tell you her thinking. So Mayor Spencer's position on this, and this is one of the reasons I love Trish, whether I agree with her or not, because she's intelligent and well thought, and she thinks about everything. Her position is, she spent a year and a half working a deal with the landlords and the rental people and the activists and the advocates that, tried to address everybody. Nobody was really happy, but it was a lot of work, and they got to a point. And her position is she doesn't want any random council to just cast all that work aside. So her point is well taken. Whether I agree with it or not, her point is well taken. And to be honest with you, Ralph, that's why I love Trish. Her points are always extremely logical. I don't know if I agree with them or not. I make my own decisions like we all do. But her thinking is extremely logical and great, and she can speak to it and explain it.
She
tells
it, not sells it. So she's not pouring on a bunch of crap that's superfluous or diverting the issue by, follow the shiny ball on this side, and she'll throw stuff in on the other side. Not her.
Right. So
it's very direct.
This is my point on Kay specifically, right? Because that is a real big issue in Alameda in this election. So I tell everyone, much like you started, Trish, it's imperative, in my opinion, that Trish is our mayor going forward in this next go-round. However, do not confuse elections. Our election for mayor is our election for mayor. Our ballot issues are asking us Alameda citizens how the citizens feel. So Trish definitely supports Kay being enshrined into the city charter. Very clear, very adamant about that. Everyone will make their own decision on that issue. That's an election. But we have this other election. It's called mayor. And what is the most important thing? The most important thing is the future of our Alameda. And that's why Kay is a big issue. However, it's two separate issues. So I've been telling everyone myself, you need to make up your mind. I think there's no choice in mayor, period. It's 100 or 0. It's basically the last national election. You either would never vote for Trump, period, and that's it. That's the mayor's election, in my opinion. However, we have ballot issues out there, and that's different. And Alameda citizens, I'm a big fan of citizens speaking, and we have had a great turnout so far in registration in Alameda County this year. They don't break it down by city at this point, but the county is a really high turnout. It's unbelievable. As far as registered votes, I believe I just heard today 71% of all possible registered voters are registered in Alameda County now. So I'm a big fan of voting. And as such, I always say to people, separate your votes. Just like we go through the statewide propositions, you might be yes, you might be no, you might be I don't know. Separate your votes. The mayor's race is imperative. Kay is imperative. I'm not going to tell you the way I think, and I'm not going to tell anybody else the way they should think. But I do always say every election is an individual election. And like you said at the beginning, I think this is critical. This is about what we want for the future of Alameda. Marilyn has consistently voted, and I would bring anybody to her voting record, ways that seem to be against what general Alamedans want. I'll just throw one out for everybody just to quote a fact. Marilyn voted to hire Jill and voted to pay off Jill Kymach. And we all should be so lucky to get $1 million after 2 years of working. So Marilyn not only made the bad decision, but then she decided to pay off another bad decision without ever hearing those tapes or anything else. So this is a vote of look at somebody's track record, look at what kind of Alameda you want, and then make each vote in each election your individual choice.
Hey, that's terrific. That was so succinct and so well put. Terrific, my friend. Rich Moskowitz is his name. Someday he's going to be a city councilman, I'm guessing.
No, he isn't.
No way? You've talked a little bit about a political future. You've had some real success. This may be a small town, but it ain't all that small. And you've made a real dent in what's going on. I think you're starting to accept that you're a powerful human being.
Well, I appreciate the kind words, and I will share that I have always enjoyed, through my decades of business experience, business strategic planning, and I've come to learn through my experiences here in Alameda that I enjoy political issue strategizing, but I'm also very clear with the incredible people I've met that there are far better people to run and to serve in city council than myself. Although I'd be happy to add my brain and my feet and my mouth to supporting those people.
Well, you'd have to identify those people first, which would mean finding them, and that might be tougher than anything. Hey, you're terrific. You'll come back, I assume, on a regular basis, as you've been doing.
Always love talking with you, Ralph. Absolutely.
All right, Rich. Best to Mayor Trish when you see her. Perhaps you can both come on together one day soon. That would be nice. Trish has guested on these airwaves before, and she seems to have enjoyed it. So bring her back.
Well, if you plan it, I'll show up. How's that?
All right. That sounds good. We'll get a day and a time that you both can give us a few moments of your day. Thanks for listening, everybody. Thank you for being my friend, Rich Moskowitz. And I'll see you when I do. It's the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. Comfortably Zoned with the Zigzag Man, Ralph Tycho. Adios, everybody. The proceeding was a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production. Thank you for listening.